Bruce Mountain, welcome. So go into a bit more detail for us as to why the wholesale price has been surging.
Hi, Joe. So, look, essentially, global gas prices have gone to incredibly high levels. And they've been doing that for some time now, about a year, and they've since reached peaks. That's been brought back to our market because we export lots of gas. And from the gas market, it's been brought into the power market because gas generators often set prices so it's forced the price at the margin up. That then is the price that all the generators get and becomes the reference price in contracts. So customers are going to pay it in time.
We've also heard this morning that it was because some coal-fired power stations were offline. Explain for us how that's contributed to this as well.
Yeah, so the vast bulk of our electricity comes from coal-fired generators. Gas is a critical fuel at the margin, and it sets the price that they all get. But by not having much coal, other fuel sources need to be brought in, and those other fuel sources have been hydro and gas. And so by pulling back on the coal production, we force the more expensive generation at the margin. And when that price of the expensive generation has gone up to crazy high levels, that forces the price up in the market overall.
So could this have been avoided or not?
I think what we're seeing in these data is an underlying pressure from gas, but we're also seeing market participants taking advantage of it. I think they could have done a lot more to increase production and to minimize the effect of these extraordinary gas prices. But it suits many of them to profit from this tightness. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing it in hydro and we're seeing it also in coal.
So they're taking advantage of the situation. Is this immoral commercial behaviour?
They would say they're making hay while the sun shines, and that's what you do in markets. I think these data suggest that there's a very extensive amount of market power, most particularly by hydro, which is owned by the Commonwealth government mainly. And there's been a windfall gain to them. Large customers and small customers are going to be paying extraordinarily higher prices. I think it's incumbent on the Commonwealth, at least, to ensure that some of that windfall goes back to customers who are actually hit by this. Certainly, these data indicate that the electricity industry could have done far more to ensure that the extreme effects of these gas prices are not flowing through into power markets as they have.
So government-owned generators have been taking advantage of this situation.
Yes, indeed. We've seen on those days when price caps were actually put in that the hydro generators pull back production even more than the gas. And the argument for the gas pulling back was that for some of them, during a period of the price cap, they couldn't cover their costs. And so, they'd have been, at that time, actually making a loss. But that's not true of the hydro. The cost of water hasn't changed. And yet they pull back even more. So we're seeing evidence of all the market participants, but coal and hydro in particular, taking advantage of the situation.
And so that's Commonwealth owned?
Yes, it is. It is. And so I think Snowy Hydro has something to answer for here. I think the Commonwealth, as its owner, needs to get very much more closely involved in what's happening with the corporations that it owns. And I think the energy regulators need to demonstrate that they're on top of things much more than they have.
What about the argument that Australia is getting out of coal too quickly and that's complicating this situation?
I certainly think it's true that we've sought to overtake a slow-moving truck, but we've hesitated. We should have been building up our wind and solar capacity far more quickly than we have. We should have been building storage so we can store the surplus at a much higher clip than we have. And as a consequence, we're now facing this market stress brought on by gas prices. And we are not having the capability to take advantage of the resource we have at the rate that we should. I don't think that's necessarily a case of not dealing with coal properly. I think it's failing to deal effectively with building the cleaner stuff. So I think the main policy message here is get on with the job of the transition so that we can move out of coal and gas as quickly as possible and insulate ourselves from these very unwelcome forces of much higher gas and coal prices.
But for how much longer will we have instances like this where the wholesale price surges because the transition to cleaner energy hasn't been as smooth as we would have liked?
I've been watching this closely for some months now, thinking it was always an aberration that would quickly change. As the Russian situation has got ever more difficult and Russia pulling back on exporting gas and this tightness in gas markets globally, I worry that this is going to extend for some time more. If that continues for months and several months, these extreme wholesale prices are going to pass through to the customer. So I do worry now that we're in a very difficult situation and these extraordinary prices are looking entrenched at least for several months, possibly even a year or two. The solution is, I think, for the regulators to get tough on the market behavior that we're seeing. I think for governments, they're going to need to step in Australia as they are in Europe and insulate customers to some degree. And they need
just,
to.
Bruce, just on that point, how do governments do that?
In Europe, they're doing that through a range of ways. There's a windfall tax on the entities that are profiting from this, which they're seeking to give back to customers, usually as some kind of either a price cap or a lump sum payment. A lump sum payment is much better because you don't want to cheapen the price in a way that causes more demand. So if you can insulate customers by flowing back some of the hit as a lump sum, that is an insulation. Very many tens of billions of dollars are involved in Britain, for example, on this. So this is a big fiscal issue. We haven't yet seen that response in Australia, perhaps not unreasonably, because I think the full extent of the wholesale price change hasn't passed through to the customer yet. But when it does, and I think it will soon to customers who are in the market to get new contracts, I think the government's going to need to insulate them to some degree. There have been numerous calls for a windfall tax. I think the Commonwealth should not set its back against that. It should have an open mind on it. There is a windfall here, no doubt about it. And I think it's going to need to compensate customers in some way, hopefully not as a cap on the variable price they see, but as a dollar amount. Certainly to those many customers that will not be able to afford electricity in future.
And Bruce, just finally, thinking of individual customers now, we're in the middle of winter. People are going to come across their highest energy bills for the year, which they regularly do in the next couple of months after they've had their heaters on through winter. How much more expensive are you expecting those winter bills will be when they come through in the next couple of months? Will it be double what they usually are or not that high?
I think for those customers who had managed to buy electricity cheaply by selecting one of the cheaper offers, they will see large increases. That's true for me personally. My own bill has gone up by a factor of 2, roughly, taking account of my export and so on to the grid. So those customers who had actively engaged will be seeing very sizable increases. So far, there's a retail price cap. There's a ceiling that's been set by the regulators. That ranges between 1% and 18% for customers on those peak offers, but there are not many that were. But if you were on one of those so far, you won't be seeing a big increase. But the regulators will be under a great deal of pressure to increase that ceiling now, because I don't think it's been set at a level that allows the retailers to get back their costs. And as a consequence, many of the retailers will not be able to sustain their business. And I think that will be a huge loss for customers in the long term. So I think there'll be pressure on them to raise the price ceiling. At these wholesale prices, the expectation should be across the market at least a doubling year on year.
Wow.
So yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah. Okay, Bruce, a terrible situation, but you've explained that really clearly. So thanks so much for talking to us. Bruce Mountain there in Melbourne.
Thank you, Joe.